Welcome, everyone, to Stepping Into Your Leadership. I'm your host, Christine Courtney. Our goal here is to give you some actionable takeaways that will help you lead your teams. Thanks for joining us on this leadership journey. Let's get started. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Stepping Into Your Leadership. I'm very excited to welcome back to the studio a favorite of our listeners, Erika Petrelli-Bayh. Welcome, Erika.
Hi, Christine.
And I thought today we would talk about something that really intrigued me about some of the work that you've been doing recently and how that may be of interest to a lot of our listeners. And that is the work that you're doing around women and visibility. And I thought for our audience, we can gear it to all women, of course, who listen, but also specifically to the workplace and how that relates. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your visibility workshops, what you're doing, and then we can kind of dig into the conversation.
Oh, I'd be delighted. I'm so excited to talk about this, Christine. It was born truly out of kind of my own journey and my own place right now and things that were near and dear to my heart and my head. And I thought, if I'm experiencing these things, I imagine other women might be too. And so the idea about visibility came from this idea that women, perhaps in my era, and I'll loosely use my era as, 40s and 50s, this is where the epicenter, women in my era who might be going through any number of things, be it menopause or divorce or career change or geographical change or empty nesting or any number of the
parents
things
being sick,
Yes. I mean, the list goes on and on of things that occur in what I call the messy middle that we naturally face and also naturally I have found in my own experience and my observation of others, don't feel like we have as many resources or ideas of what to do. And one of the more negative side effects is that we might start to feel invisible in this phase of our life. We might start to feel invisible at work. We might start to feel invisible with our children, with our partners, just in the world, kind of where we kind of throw up our hands and say, well, what am I supposed to do now or what's next? So I created this series kind of as a reclaiming of ourselves back to visibility and possibly for some of us visibility in a way that we have never yet experienced in our life. So it really is an opportunity to think about what's possible and what's next in this chapter and chapters ahead. And how can we reimagine what that looks like instead of I guess that's just the way it is, to isn't it amazing that all of these possibilities still lie ahead? That was how it was born. And it's just been a joy to talk to women. And after the original iteration, it doesn't have to be women in their 40s and 50s. It can be a woman in her early 20s who's just starting in her career and immediately feeling lost.
Yeah.
It can be a woman in her 70s or 80s who, as she's sunsetting different parts of her life, trying to figure out what does that legacy look like. So it really is expansive. But the idea of women feeling invisible has been a message that's been permeating.
I love it. It's interesting because I hear versions of this from all different women at different ages. And I think you're right. I think we start to talk about it in those years when women are facing a tremendous amount of hormonal changes, who in previous decades never were discussed out loud, right? But certainly are now, right? They said menopause is having a moment.
It is having a moment. I think that might actually have been what planted the original scene, is that menopause is suddenly having a moment.
Yes.
So to talk about the physical realities of menopause is finally something that we're opening the curtains to. Celebrities are leading the charge to say, I'm going to tell you what's happening with my body, what's going on, the nitty gritty, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And so it's so welcome to have these conversations out loud. No generation before has been able to feel comfortable having these conversations. And so I think my seed was, let's complete the story. Let's not talk just about what's happening to us physically, but let's look at all the aspects of our life that also possibly in tandem are shifting and changing in a way that we haven't necessarily had the voice or the language to speak about previously. And really, how do we own that in the way that we're kind of owning our menopause moment?
Yeah. And I think it's interesting because I think at all levels, there's different hormonal things that are happening in our brain and in our bodies that affect this idea of visibility, whether it's in our early 20s, whether it's later, like you said, in your sunsetting years. I've certainly heard my mother say this to me. She goes, as you get older, your voice gets lower, softer, sometimes naturally. And she goes, I just feel invisible sometimes, that people don't see me anymore as a woman because you're seen differently in your older years.
Yeah.
But also that you're not heard as much and people don't care to listen. So she has trouble sometimes feeling relevant. So I thought that was interesting when I heard you say that it is really at all different levels. And then when we work with young women in the office, a lot of times the young new generation coming in, Gen Z or Alpha, whatever you want to call them, I'm hearing more and more the anxiety levels that hold those women back from visibility because of, mental health challenges, things that happen from COVID on, right? Or lots of other things that are getting in the way. But I hear a lot of talk about the anxiety that holds those generations sometimes back. And of course, we're talking in generalizations, right? But we're trying to suss out where is this important for the workplace. And if you're managing people, to know that things are happening, and this idea of people struggling, and especially, with women, there's men too that struggle with this, don't get me wrong, but I do think it's something that women are calling to our attention. And since we are more than half of the workplace at this time, it's important to think about this.
Yeah. I do want to say, if there's a single man that tuned in and is still here,
please be here.
If you didn't listen and go, oh, this one's not for me. If you're still here, this series and this conversation was designed and will continue to be crafted specifically with women in mind, because I'm speaking of my own experience as a woman, and the ultimate messaging and experience translates across genders. And really, as much as it translates across ages, this idea that how do I find my place and my voice and feel like it is being heard, that I do have a place at the table, whatever that might be. So it does translate beyond just women. There is just something very specific to women that seems to occur in a magnified way, which is why we want to talk about it.
Yeah. And I'll talk personally. And then what I'd love to do is hear from you some of the things that you're doing to help people. Do you know what I mean? So they can get a sense of like, oh, here's some things I can try at home, so to speak, or try in the office. I'm a big fan of Luann Brizendine, and I've talked about her a lot in my career since she's a neuropsychiatrist. For those of you out there, I highly recommend her books, but she wrote a book on the female brain. She also wrote a book on the male brain, and she wrote most recently her book on menopausal and postmenopause called The Upside. And she really takes a look at the upside of all the negative that we hear about menopause. And I was just so thankful to have that be the name of the book that I, of course, read it immediately. And I'm a fan of hers. But if you have young kids, read The Male and Female Brain, because that will help with that. If you're in their 40s or 50s or 60s, read The Upside first. But one of the things that I love that she said that I just want to add to it from my own women who are in their 50s like I am, or maybe in your 40s, depending on what's happening with you. But she says the estrogen and oxytocin that have been pumping through her brain for years have quieted down. Women don't just feel as much stimulation in their brain with their hormones to do caretaking anymore. So there's a freedom that leaves you when some of those hormones of oxytocin leave you as well. Like we think of all the negative effects, right, on our skin, on our hair, on our grumpiness. But the good thing is we also don't feel like we have to take care of everybody. And that can free you up in terms of leadership. And
interesting.
I find for myself, I don't know about you, Erika, but I used to care a lot what people thought about me. Even when I would say, oh, I don't think I care what people thought about, I did. You know what I mean? And now I care so much less that some of it, sure, I could say is self-reflection or self-awareness, or, that I'm growing and learning, but some of it's just hormones. Some of it is just hormones that I have very little to do with. Mother Nature is helping that. And that gives me a freedom to lead in a way that just I don't have to think about, oh God, what will someone think if I do this? Or what will someone think if it's a freedom to make a choice strategically. And what she also says is that midlife is often when women are just hitting their peak, So think about that if you're in a workplace women have a lot more energy once you get through the brain fog, and there's some brain fog that happens, right? For different people in there, especially in perimenopause. But what happens later is that you actually get sharper, more focused, and more focused on achievement of goals. And I think that's really exciting.
It is exciting. That's fascinating. The idea that it's kind of evolutionarily based, that we reach a point of freedom from caring to a certain extent.
Yeah.
In the best possible way. And it rings true if you've watched any interview where sort of like interview on the streets, what advice would you give your younger self? Or what advice would you give the younger generation? Through line that you hear time and time again is don't worry so much about what other people think. Stop caring so much about other people's opinion of your decisions. And how interesting from your perspective of what you just shared, that there's a part of that will only be gifted to you with time.
Right.
That you can't craft that at an earlier age because your brain and body are hardwired for that tending to and that pleasing and that nurturing, which resonates outside of just parental relationships, but all of our relationships that you cycle out of to a certain extent. And a gift that we get in the messy middle is this opportunity to care about what I want. If you are on board, come on board. And if you're not on board, well, enjoy the ride that you're on. I'll see you later. We don't have to pause as much in that sort of angst-ridden worry. Is this the right thing measured by somebody else's standards?
Right.
Is this the right choice measured by somebody else's expectation? Is this what I'm supposed to be doing? And instead, we're allowed the opportunity, if we're willing to take it, to say, this is what is true for me. This is what is right for me. And I'm going forward simply because it's true and right for me. And that's all I need to know.
Yeah. I love it. It's really interesting, right? When you think about I love what you said about that our notes to our younger self often have to do with that, right? And I would say that I've never heard a man, this is a generalization, but I've never heard a man's note to their younger self be that. So maybe it's unfair that we're asking young women who are fighting against those hormones to do that. But if we could free them a little bit of that early, how great. So I was just curious, when you're meeting with women, and I know you have such a strong, people that love Erika, boy, she has such a strong group of followers that love being around her, being with her. And if you ever get an opportunity to take a workshop or class with her, you will be, it will do your heart and your soul good. But I was curious, what are some tips that come up that you give to women of all ages? And you can be specific or general if you want, whatever, that helps that people maybe can work on at home, no matter where they are.
Probably one of the most prevalent and one that is applicable really to any age, because it happens to us in varying degrees, is to think about the stories we're telling ourselves about ourselves and really getting clear on if those stories are still true or if they were ever true in the first place. Because what happens to us is we collect stories about ourselves throughout our lifetime. And they're stories that are crafted out of experiences and our own beliefs. So they're stories that are true, that we have helped shape. They're also stories that people have said about us or to us, or opinions that have been shared with us. So we've collected stories of us from other people. However it goes, throughout the years, those stories shape how we see ourselves, our identity. And the potential problem is that we can be carrying the weight of stories that are no longer true or that no longer serve us, but we're still carrying the weight of that story. And those stories shape how we interact with the world, and certainly how we see our ability to, or our opportunity to step into new opportunities or try new things. And so sometimes those stories are helpful and kind of buoy us, but a lot of times those stories drag us down or hold us back. And so one of the things I spend a lot of time in this series is really looking at the stories with love and grace, and then figuring out which ones are not true any longer and honoring an opportunity to say goodbye to those stories. And what are they replaced with? What are the new stories that are true?
Okay, so I'm going to ask you two things. One, can you give me an example? You don't have to say the person's name, but can you give me an example of what specifically you're something you're referring to or talking about? And then two, how is this different from like therapy? Because some people listening to this could be like, oh, I talk about this in therapy with my, about my stories and how to kind of, work past that. So how are those, one, an example, and two, how that might be different from therapy?
Well, the truth is it's very therapy light because we are talking in feelings, we're talking in relationships, We're talking in the human heart space. So that's always going to have a tone of therapy-ism to it. The difference here is that it's practical, conversational, and really meant, think of it as you and your journal, but with a guide to help you. So that is what it is. So that is not everybody's cup of tea, for sure. One recent example that just stuck into my mind is a conversation I was having with a woman who is well into her 40s, who said she still feels like the kid at work. And a lot of that is projection. She started off in the workplace as a kid. And so kind of from the beginning, and this is true of a lot of women and men, but women, if I start off at an organization fresh out of college, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, in my early 20s, I'll have that, oh, she's just the kid, naturally occur. So that's not good nor bad. That is what it is. But what can happen is if I don't check that story, to this woman's point, 20 years later in my 40s, I still kind of have that feeling of I defer to the adults in the room. When if I actually looked around for a moment, I'm the adult in the room. I have wisdom and experience that actually informs this moment and that can actually guide us towards a better strategic decision. But because the story that I've allowed to sort of persist over all these years is that I'm just the kid, maybe I lean into the kid version of, I don't know, there's something that happens to the way I engage in a meeting as the kid where I'm selling myself short. I'm selling my wisdom short. I'm selling my experience short.
Yeah.
So that's a really tangible example. I think that happens to a lot of us.
Yeah. Great example. What is another tip that people can do besides one, I think looking at your stories and the things you tell yourself, even if it's in a journal, right? Like noting like, oh, wait, I need to reassess that. Because sometimes if you don't bring it to light, you're just operating, your operating system is presenting as if it's true. So I love that idea of like writing down those things and like kind of checking yourself on them. What's another one that people can do?
Well, similar to that, but based in what we learned from positive intelligence and Shirzad and his team in the idea of the saboteurs in our mind, that we all have these voices in our head. And some of us have we all have voices that are critical and complementary, but we have different degrees of those voices. And some of us have voices that are really only critical, or those are the ones that we only hear. And so another common conversation I'll have is to really get quiet and think about what are the voices in my head most commonly saying to me? And are they positive and complimentary and supportive, or are they tearing me down? Are they critical? Are they judging? That is the kind of, oh, who am I to think I could? Oh, I could never. Oh, I'm not smart enough, or I'm too old for. That it's in those voices that live in the realm of that's not possible. Any of those kind of voices. And the simple, tangible activity that somebody can do is a literal flip the script. So keeping with your journal, what are the voices saying? And what's the kinder, softer, more encouraging version of that? Just flip the script on its head. If it wasn't too late, if I did have enough money, if I was young enough to, what happens then is it opens up my mind to possibilities. And really, in the end, if we had to distill it down to an essence of one thing, to me, that's it, is to open up my mind and heart to the fact that there are possibilities. And really getting clear on the places that I myself am stopping myself from those possibilities. Because the truth is, we will always have challenges in our life. There will always be external factors blocking us from A, B, or C thing. But if all I do is point my finger and say, well, that person's stopping me or that circumstance is stopping me, then I'm only harming myself. I'm only limiting myself. So if I know that the only person I can control is myself, my first thing is to reframe my own mindset to think about, I need to get clear and steady on the belief that this is possible, because then I can start to navigate around, well, if these are the real challenges, what am I going to do about them? Mm-hmm. As opposed to just being like, well, there's the challenges. I guess it wasn't possible after all.
Yeah, that's great. So those are two really specific things that one can do in the kind of, I would call it like self-awareness realm, right? Of starting to uncover, like, in the Johari's window, it would be that, that window of, what does he call it? What's there?
The blind self or the hidden self. I mean, both. It's both quadrants. Is really like, what parts of my hidden self have I been unwilling to share, and why? Mm-hmm. And which ones might I have the courage to share? But then the blind self, the blind spots are, what are the things that I'm just not noticing because I'm so blocked by?
Mm-hmm.
And then you can fill in the blank by a million things that block us. But I think it's a shedding. A lot of this process is a shedding of the things that are blocking us. And a lot of the things that block us are our own limiting beliefs.
Almost always they come down to that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
one more tip that you would have on this idea of creating visibility, maybe in one of the other sections, like let's assume that somebody has done some of the work on their self-awareness and so forth that you're talking about, then like what's something that you can do like actively to start to shift this?
Well, so if you thought previously it sounded like therapy, hold on to your bootstrap because really once we are sort of paring down or tearing away or shedding, whatever word you want to use, the sort of limiting beliefs or the old stories, obviously the next thing we have to do is build or rebuild. And so I like to use a fire like visual in my mind of I'm trying to build this blazing, beautiful bonfire. And so what do I need to put in that fire to tend to it? And what's smothering the fire? So continuously, like, what do I need to get out? Is there enough space in there? But what are the things I'm tending to this fire so that I can reclaim? Or, like I said, for some of us, claim for the first time the beautiful being that I am and all that's possible. And so I think there is this kind of lives in that realm of positive psychology, manifestation, growth mindset. It lives in that camp. And so you can take this as far as you want, but really loving yourself actively and out loud with whether it's positive mantras, I say as much as possible, this sort of post-it notes on your mirror. What something that I think I've said to you in previous conversations is I have alarms set during the day that just have sort of positive, this is a beautiful day. I'm filled with abundance. I have so much to be grateful for. Those messages that I actually just put in alarms that just go off in the day. So I look down and there's the message. That's like the lazy girls version, right? Because I don't have to remember to say those things, but I know that I need to. So the part one is kind of distilling away what doesn't serve me. But then part two is what is that in replacement of that and tending to the things that do serve me and do fill me. And a really important, as cheesy as it sounds, first step in that is really giving yourself the love that maybe you feel that you're missing, maybe that you feel that you've been seeking, that you deserve as the person you truly are.
Yeah, great. And there is so much data and research now that proves that things like mantras that we thought for years were just cheesy, affirmations work. It works. Having gratitudes every night works. And if you're out there questioning that, try it for 30 days.
That's what I would say. Just try it and see what happens.
Try to prove us wrong and see what happens, because it's amazing how when I was younger, I saw it in my kids. I did it. It was easier for me to start with them than it was for myself, but it made me do it myself. And I started to see a change in how we as a family were even around the dinner table. But now, that they're older and stuff, I still see it in myself, like that, how valuable that is. And I love that you're using technology, Erika, to help you remember these things. I mean, come on.
Look at me. At you. See, I evolve as a person.
Exactly. I think and a couple of other things that I thought about when you were talking was Amy Cuddy's work. She has a book out, if you're interested, out there called Presence. And she talks, and she has a great TED Talk that's probably easier to watch very quickly. But basically she goes into the super, power poses. And that's also a great tip, that I've used in moments of feeling like, oh God, I'm going to crumble under the pressure or the stress. Or I felt my confidence like draining. And it weirdly works that if you put yourself in these power poses, she calls, for those of you listening, you can't see us, so I'll explain. If you just put your hands up, really make yourself as big as possible. Or if you're in a meeting, let's say that you're invited to, and you feel like I don't belong at this table, and you feel naturally, oh, my shoulders are contracting, my chest is constricted, whatever, we physically make ourselves smaller. She says to try to imagine yourself, mansplaining on the subway, like this manspreading rather, or spreading. Mansplaining or spreading. Spread your legs out, make your chest open, make yourself take up a lot of space, and that actually that physical manifestation of that works on your brain and starts to release things in your brain that make you become confident from the outside in, rather than all of the deep work that needs to be from the inside out, right? So that sometimes you have to do it quickly, work from the outside in those moments perhaps. And so she gives you all of the data behind why it works. But it can also be that before you go into a meeting, you do a super, a Wonder Woman pose with your hands on your hips, or a Superman pose if you're a man, on your hips, but that's the chest out. What does that look like? What does that feel? And how do you start to change the way you feel and to notice that? So I think that has been something that I have specifically used in some very, I was, and Erika knows this, but I mentioned it to our audience, but I had to go through a deposition once that was very nerve wracking. And I thought, I'm going to crumble. I wasn't even guilty, but I started to feel like I was in my body because I was just so nervous, and I was so aware of the consequences of whatever I was saying that I had to excuse myself, go in the bathroom, do a couple jumping jacks, look at myself in the mirror and say, you could give myself those affirmations that you're talking about. Like, you can do this, you have nothing to worry about. And then I did some power poses with some breath. I went back in there and it was a whole different ball game. And the lawyer I was with, an older man that was working with us, he said, I don't know what you did when you went to the bathroom, but you were a different woman coming in that office. And
that's amazing.
Yeah, he goes, you killed it. And I would have been a disaster if I had stayed in that room. The best thing I did was give myself that break to go out and do that,
Well, it's, it goes back to the fake it till you make it, which in recent years has gotten a lot of criticism, understandably so, but the authentic version of that could not be more true. The fake it till you make it, the more recent phrase that essentially echoes the same thing is believe it and then you will see it. This idea that if I fake it till I make it in an inauthentic way, then I'll never be in alignment. But if I really allow myself to believe in what's possible before I can tangibly feel it or see it, I do. And that's what manifestation is about, right? Is that if you can picture it in your mind's eye, and if you can feel the way it feels, and if you can give yourself the space, then you do start to create the path forward for it to actually materialize. And because the way you're showing up is different. That's what it is for you, is you did these exercises in the bathroom and it allowed you to show up energetically differently. And that not only impacted you, but it impacted the room. That's such an important part of visibility, because when we shrink, so often we're shrinking from fear, we're shrinking from the weight of expectation, we're shrinking from anxiety. And the truth is, there will always be obstacles. There will always be challenges. And it's that idea of you find what you look for, where your attention goes, the energy grows. If I'm only looking at the obstacles and the challenges, then I will shrink into invisibility, because that's all I'll be able to see. But if I do these things, whether it's the exercise we talked about today, or just trying to find the place in me that believes that something beautiful and powerful is possible in this current situation, then it just automatically opens up a path for that to actually become true.
Yeah. I love it. One other thing that I've been talking to a lot of women lately, and is this idea also not just in your body and your energy, but also in your voice. And sometimes we are so careful. And so we don't bring our voice to a meeting or a room unless we're sure that it's the right thing. And I would just push you a little bit to try to give yourself something like, you know what, I'm going to try to say something in every single meeting I'm in, even if it's just one thing. And believe me, some people I have to say, you're only allowed to say 3 things, right? But a lot of times it's just one thing. If you can just speak up in one meeting, and it's a really good rule of thumb, especially if you're early in your career or you're a manager or whatever, just start to watch that, because a lot of women just wait, and then our voices are never heard, and it's important.
Well, there's an opportunity for anyone in a leadership position that's listening right now, which is, and this speaks to psychological safety, right? That the sort of inclusion idea. So we've been talking about what I can do for myself, but there's also ways that we can positively influence and impact others. And if I'm in a leadership role, it's my responsibility to look for all of my staff members, but particularly if there's a woman who is not speaking up in meetings, that I notice that and I draw that out. Christine, tell me what you're thinking. What ideas do you have? That I find ways to invite them into the conversation. That's great leadership that creates psychological safety, and it might help the woman who's at that sort of crossroads of crisis of, I don't know what my voice is or where my place is, and I'm struggling. And that might help her more quickly get to the other side.
Love it. Yeah, you're right. It's not only about ourselves, but also then how are we leading? How are we being? That's wonderful. Erika, thank you so much for being here
Thank
today.
you.
If you are hopefully those of you listening today got some ideas of ways that you can show up, that you can become more visible, that you can help others become more visible. And we will definitely have you back. If you look up Erika, if you feel inspired today, take one of her courses on visibility. I promise you it will be profoundly impactful for your life. And Erika is always a guest here on the show, so we'll have her back to inform us one way or another. So thank you, Erika.
Thanks, Christine.
Thanks, everybody, for listening. I'd like to give a special shout out to our podcast producer, Richard Francisco. Check out our notes for any details. And if you get anything out of this, please follow us. And if you enjoy it, please take a moment to rate us or write a comment. It will mean the world to us. We'd love to hear from you. And if you just can't get enough, follow me on TikTok and check out tlpnyc.com/podcast for more information.